Growing up, I always thought my father, and I shared an unbreakable bond. After my parents' bitter divorce when I was just 10 years old, he became my anchor in a world that suddenly felt chaotic and uncertain. My mother moved across the country, leaving behind only sporadic phone calls and birthday cards, while Dad and I built what I believed to be a fortress of trust and honesty. We were each other's everything. Our late night talks about life, his quiet support during school struggles, and even our shared love for bad TV shows made me feel like we were an impenetrable team. But as it turns out, that fortress wasn't as solid as I had imagined. Beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect relationship lay secrets, so shocking they would eventually shatter everything I thought I knew about him and myself. At first glance, our lives seemed simple. Just a father and daughter navigating the aftermath of heartbreak together. But looking back now, there were cracks in the foundation I refused to see. Why did he wait so long to introduce me to Linda? How could he keep something as monumental as her existence from me for months? And why did he look away whenever I asked too many questions about his past? These doubts gnawed at me over the years, but I dismissed them as paranoia or lingering resentment from my parents' split. I wanted to believe my dad was the hero of my story, a man who sacrificed everything to raise me right. Instead, I discovered he was human, flawed, and hiding truths that would ripple through generations. The unraveling began subtly enough, a comment here, an unanswered question there, but soon spiraled into revelations that left me reeling. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I truly understood about the man I called my father. It wasn't just small omissions. These were seismic betrayals buried deep beneath layers of silence. Each new discovery felt like stepping on a landmine, exploding the fragile peace I clung to for nearly 2 decades. By the time the full weight of his deceptions came crashing down, I no longer recognized the man I once idolized or the family I thought I belonged to. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a nightmare far darker than anything I could have imagined. When my father announced his marriage to Linda, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. At first, I tried to be supportive. After all, he deserved happiness, but something about their whirlwind relationship set off warning bells in my mind. Then came Emma, Linda's 25-year-old daughter, who instantly became my stepsister. She was everything I wasn't, vivacious, carefree, and seemingly perfect. While I'd spent years building a quiet life for myself after my parents' bitter divorce, Emma waltzed into our family like a storm I hadn't prepared for. The tension between us was subtle at first, a glance here, an unspoken judgment there, but it grew heavier over time. Her constant need for attention clashed with my desire for independence. It didn't help that Dad seemed eager to mold us into some picture-perfect blended family, ignoring how awkward and forced it all felt. Meanwhile, Linda's presence brought its own complications. She often hinted that I should try harder to bond with Emma, as if my reserved nature made me the problem. Every dinner together felt like walking on eggshells, each conversation laced with underlying resentment. Little did I know these small fractures were just the beginning of much deeper fissures waiting to crack open. When Emma announced her family's move to my city, I should have seen the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Jake's new job at a tech startup seemed like an exciting opportunity for them, but it quickly became clear that their relocation would upend my carefully balanced life. At first, I tried to be supportive. Helping them settle in felt like the right thing to do. I showed them around town, recommended neighborhoods, and even assisted with unpacking boxes. But what started as harmless assistance soon spiraled into something suffocating. Within days of their arrival, Emma began dropping by my apartment unannounced, her 2 kids in tow, asking me to watch them for just an hour while she ran errands. An hour turned into 2, then 3, and eventually entire evenings. My work-from-home schedule as a graphic designer suddenly felt like less of a privilege and more of a curse. No matter how late I stayed up working, I couldn't escape the looming expectation that I'd drop everything whenever Emma needed me. The tension grew unbearable. Each time I reminded her about hiring a babysitter, she brushed it off with excuses. It's temporary, or your family, we help each other out. But here's the truth. I'm not cut out for childcare. Kids make me anxious, and entertaining Liam and Ava left me drained. Worse still, Emma acted as though my boundaries were optional suggestions rather than firm lines drawn in the sand. Every knock on my door felt like another brick added to the wall between us. I began dreading evenings, wondering if this would be the night she'd show up again without warning. What started as minor inconveniences escalated into full-blown resentment. Little did I know these demands were only the beginning of a much darker chapter one that would test every ounce of patience and strength I had left. The tension between Emma and me finally reached its breaking point one fateful Friday evening, and it was an explosion of emotions I hadn't anticipated. Earlier that day, I had made it crystal clear to Emma that I couldn't babysit her kids, this time more firmly than ever before. I even went as far as sending her a text message in the morning, "I have plans tonight. Please don't bring the kids over." She replied with a curt, "Okay," and I foolishly believed that would be the end of it. But at 6 p.m., just as I was slipping on my coat to meet my friends for a long-awaited celebration, there was a sharp knock at my door. My stomach sank when I opened it to find Emma standing there, Liam clutching her hand, and Ava squirming in her arms. Before I could protest, she thrust the children toward me and turned to leave without so much as a backward glance. "What are you doing?" I shouted after her, but she ignored me, rushing down the hallway like she hadn't just appended my entire evening. Furious, I called her repeatedly, only to be met with silence. Even Jake didn't answer his phone. Trapped with two restless toddlers, I watched helplessly as my carefully laid plans crumbled around me. For 3 agonizing hours, I juggled their demands while seething inside, replaying every moment of this escalating feud in my mind. By the time Emma returned at 9 p.m., I was livid. "How dare you do this to me?" I snapped the second she walked through the door. Her casual demeanor infuriated me further. "You knew I had plans. You completely disregarded everything I said." Emma rolled her eyes, dismissing my anger as overdramatic. "It's not a big deal, Sophia. Something came up, it happens. Families help each other out." "Help!" I shot back, my voice rising. "This isn't helping. It's taking advantage. We're not close, Emma. You can't just barge into my life whenever it suits you and expect me to drop everything." Her expression hardened. "Oh, right. Because you've always been so eager to bond with me, haven't you? Ever since Dad married Mom, you've treated us like we're invaders in your perfect little world." "That's not true," I retorted, though guilt pricked at me. "But even if it were, that doesn't give you the right to manipulate me or disrespect my boundaries." Our voices echoed through the apartment, raw and unfiltered. The argument escalated until we were shouting over each other, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. It wasn't just about babysitting anymore. It was about feeling unseen, unheard, and betrayed. And then came the final blow. Later that night, my father called, furious. He accused me of being selfish and cruel, siding entirely with Emma. The man who had always been my rock now stood against me, demanding I apologize and fall in line. That call left me shattered, questioning whether our bond was ever real or just another fragile illusion waiting to collapse. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined possible. When my father called me the day after my explosive argument with Emma, I expected him to listen to understand my side of the story. Instead, his voice was cold, distant, and laced with disappointment. He didn't even let me explain before launching into a tirade about how selfish I was being. "You need to apologize to Emma," he demanded, his tone sharp enough to make me flinch. "This is what families do for each other. If you can't put aside your own needs for your sister, then maybe you're not the person I thought you were." His words hit like a sledgehammer, shattering the fragile trust I still clung to. The man who had been my rock, my confidant, my hero was now standing against me, siding with someone I barely knew. I tried to reason with him, pouring out everything I kept bottled up. Emma's constant intrusions, her blatant disregard for my boundaries, the way she manipulated our family ties to guilt me into submission. But he wasn't listening. All he cared about was maintaining some warped idea of familial harmony, no matter the cost to me. Then came the ultimatum, the moment that felt like the floor had been ripped out from beneath me. If you don't apologize and start helping Emma again, I'll have no choice but to cut you off, he said, his voice eerily calm. Cut me off. The phrase echoed in my mind, surreal and suffocating. My own father was threatening to sever ties over this. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I was trapped in an impossible dilemma. Should I stand firm and risk losing the one person who had always been there for me? Or should I swallow my pride, compromise my values, and become the obedient daughter he expected me to be? Every fiber of my being screamed at the injustice of it all. How could he not see how much this was hurting me? I felt abandoned, betrayed by the very person I trusted most. Yet, as angry as I was, a small part of me wondered if I was truly wrong. Was I being too harsh? Too rigid? The weight of those questions pressed down on me, leaving me paralyzed between two unbearable choices. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. TT6. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of our family finally erupted into a full-blown crisis when I uncovered the truth about Jake's affair. It started with an innocent trip to a local coffee shop where I stumbled upon something I never could have anticipated. There he was, Jake, Emma's husband, sitting across from a woman who wasn't his wife. At first, I thought she might be a colleague or friend, but their body language told a different story. He reached for her hand, their gazes locked in a way that felt intimate and unmistakably romantic. My heart sank as I realized what I was witnessing. My brother-in-law was having an affair. I wanted to confront him on the spot, but fear paralyzed me. Instead, I left quietly, my mind racing with questions. Should I tell Emma? Would she even believe me? Our already fragile relationship hung by a thread, and accusing her husband of infidelity felt like throwing gasoline onto a fire. For days, I wrestled with guilt and confusion, unsure of how to handle the situation. Then, just as I decided to confide in Emma, she called me in tears. She admitted she'd followed Jake herself and discovered the same horrifying truth. He had been meeting this woman secretly for months. But the bombshell didn't stop there. When Emma revealed the identity of the woman, my world shattered completely. The person Jake had been seeing wasn't just any stranger, it was my half-sister. Yes, you read that right. My father, the man I trusted above all others, had kept yet another devastating secret. Years ago, he'd had a brief relationship with Jake's biological mother, resulting in a daughter neither of us knew existed until now. The revelation hit me like a freight train. Every foundation I'd built my life upon crumbled in an instant. How could my father keep something so monumental hidden for decades? And how could Jake betray Emma not just as her husband, but as part of our family with someone who shared our blood? I felt betrayed on every level, by my father's lies, by Jake's betrayal, and by the cruel irony of fate itself. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a nightmare that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. Trust, once broken, seemed impossible to repair. Emma's decision to leave Jake and move in with me felt like a tidal wave crashing into my already fragile life. She called me late one night, her voice trembling with desperation, and asked if she and the kids could stay with me temporarily. Despite everything that had transpired between us, the arguments, the guilt trips, the emotional turmoil, I couldn't turn her away. How could I refuse shelter to my sister, who was now fleeing not just a crumbling marriage, but also the horrifying betrayal of her husband's affair with our own half-sister? The irony of it all was suffocating. Just months ago, I had been fighting tooth and nail to set boundaries with Emma, and now here she was, completely dependent on me. At first, I tried to convince myself that this arrangement would only last a short while. But as days turned into weeks, reality hit hard. My apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude and order, had become a chaotic whirlwind of crying children, sleepless nights, and Emma's unpredictable emotions. She oscillated between tearful breakdowns and bursts of anger, leaving me walking on eggshells every moment I was home. My work suffered. Deadlines slipped through my fingers as I juggled client calls with Liam's tantrums or Ava's demands for attention. Even my mental health, which I'd fought so fiercely to protect, began to unravel under the weight of responsibility. The hardest part wasn't just the physical exhaustion, it was the internal conflict tearing me apart. On one hand, I wanted to support Emma. She was broken, vulnerable, and trying to rebuild her life after unimaginable betrayal. On the other hand, I resented how much of my life had been sacrificed in the process. Every time I considered setting stricter boundaries, guilt gnawed at me. Wasn't family supposed to step up in times of crisis? Yet, hadn't I already given too much of myself to people who rarely respected my limits? To make matters worse, Jake didn't disappear quietly. He showed up unannounced multiple times, pounding on my door and shouting threats until I was forced to call the police. The fear in Liam and Ava's eyes during those confrontations haunted me. They were innocent bystanders caught in this mess, and yet they bore the brunt of their parents' failures. It was a relentless cycle of chaos, and I felt like I was drowning in it. By the time Emma finally found a small apartment and moved out, I was emotionally drained and questioning whether I'd done enough or too much. Her departure brought some relief, but the scars remained. My carefully constructed world had been shattered, and I wasn't sure I'd ever piece it back together again. The rift between my father and me felt like an insurmountable chasm, a gaping wound that refused to heal. After the bombshell revelation about his past affair with Jake's biological mother, and the subsequent discovery of our shared half-sister, I could barely look at him without feeling betrayed. For weeks, we avoided each other entirely. Every unanswered call or ignored text message only deepened the silence between us. But when he finally showed up at my apartment one rainy evening, visibly shaken and asking for a chance to talk, I couldn't turn him away. What followed was one of the most emotionally charged conversations of my life. He began by apologizing not just for keeping secrets, but for failing to be the father he promised he'd always be. His voice cracked as he admitted how ashamed he had been of his youthful indiscretion, how terrified he was of losing me if I ever found out. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, tears streaming down his face. "But instead, I've hurt you in ways I can never take back." Hearing him say those words broke something inside me. All the anger, frustration, and heartache I'd bottled up came pouring out. I told him how his lies made me question everything, our relationship, his integrity, even my own identity. "You were supposed to be the one person I could trust above all others." I shouted, my voice trembling. "How am I supposed to move forward knowing you've kept this from me my entire life?" For hours we sat there unraveling years of buried pain. He confessed that he'd struggled with guilt over remarrying Linda, fearing it would drive a wedge between us. I admitted that I'd harbored resentment toward him for replacing Mom, though I'd never voiced it until now. Each admission felt like peeling back layers of scar tissue, exposing raw wounds neither of us knew still festered. Therapy became our lifeline, a safe space where we could confront these truths without judgment. Slowly, painfully, we began rebuilding trust. Yet, despite the progress, doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Could we truly repair what had been broken? Or were some fractures too deep to mend? Only time would tell, but for now we clung to hope, a fragile thread holding together the remnants of our once unshakable bond. The journey to understanding my worth and setting boundaries was anything but smooth. At first, I wrestled with guilt so much so that it felt like a constant weight pressing down on my chest. Every accusatory comment from family members echoed in my mind. Asterisk, "You're being selfish. Family comes first. Is it really too much to ask?" Their words gnawed at me, making me question whether I was truly the villain they painted me as. Was I wrong for wanting space? For refusing to sacrifice every ounce of my energy for people who rarely considered mine? The internal battle raged relentlessly, leaving me emotionally drained. But then came moments of clarity, small yet profound realizations that began to reshape how I saw myself. During one particularly heated argument with my father, he accused me of harboring resentment toward Linda and Emma, claiming I never accepted them as part of the family. His words stung, but they also forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps I had been holding on to bitterness without fully realizing it. But wasn't that bitterness born out of feeling abandoned by him after his remarriage? Of being expected to play roles I never signed up for: stepdaughter, babysitter, confidant? This self-awareness didn't come easily. It required hours of journaling late into the night, tears streaming down my face as I unpacked years of suppressed emotions. I realized I couldn't keep living this way, constantly bending to meet others' expectations while ignoring my own needs. Yet, standing firm wasn't without consequences. Friends distanced themselves, calling me cold or unreasonable. Even strangers online criticized me when Emma shared cryptic posts about selfish relatives. The societal pressure to conform to be the dutiful daughter, the supportive sister, felt suffocating. Still, something inside me shifted. I started saying no, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Each refusal became an act of defiance against the narrative that my value lay solely in what I could give to others. It wasn't easy. Every boundary I set felt like stepping into uncharted territory. But slowly, I began reclaiming pieces of myself, learning that prioritizing my mental health wasn't selfish, it was survival. After months of relentless chaos, I finally made the decision to step away from it all. The weight of my family's secrets, the betrayal, the lies, the tangled web of relationships had become suffocating. My father's hidden past, Emma's crumbling marriage, Jake's affair with our half-sister. It felt like every corner of my life was tainted by drama and heartbreak. I needed space, not just from them, but from myself. So, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I took a sabbatical from work and booked a one-way ticket to Europe. It wasn't an escape. It was survival. The first few days were surreal. Wandering through cobblestone streets and quaint European villages, sitting alone in quiet cafes, and watching sunsets over unfamiliar landscapes gave me moments of peace I hadn't known I craved. But even amidst the beauty, the questions haunted me. What did family really mean? Was it blood that bound us together, or something deeper: trust, love, shared experiences? And what about happiness? Could I truly find it if I kept sacrificing pieces of myself for others? These thoughts swirled endlessly in my mind, each answer leading to more questions. At times, I felt like I was unraveling, peeling back layers of who I thought I was to confront the raw truth beneath. One evening, as I sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean in Portugal, I broke down crying. The enormity of everything hit me at once: the years of suppressed resentment toward my father, the guilt of feeling distant from Emma, the confusion about whether I had done enough or too much. For so long, I had defined myself through my roles: daughter, stepsister, and professional. But now, stripped of those labels, I didn't know who I was anymore. Yet, strangely, there was freedom in that uncertainty. Maybe I didn't need to have all the answers right away. Maybe healing wasn't about fixing everything, but learning to live with the cracks. As weeks turned into months, I began reconnecting with parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I painted again, something I hadn't done since childhood. I journaled daily, pouring out my fears, hopes, and dreams onto paper. I met strangers who became friends, sharing stories over meals and late-night conversations. One woman, Clara, told me about her own fractured family, a tale of estrangement and reconciliation that spanned decades. Families are messy, she said with a wry smile. But they're also resilient. Sometimes you have to let go of what you think they should be to appreciate what they are. Her words stayed with me, echoing long after we parted ways. They reminded me of the tentative progress I'd seen back home. Emma was slowly rebuilding her life, finding strength I hadn't realized she possessed. She called me regularly, updating me on the kids and her new job at the bookstore. Her voice sounded lighter, freer. My father and I still talked weekly, our conversations cautious but sincere. He admitted he was seeing a therapist, working through his shame and guilt. "I want to be better for you, for everyone," he said during one call. His vulnerability moved me, though I couldn't fully forgive him yet. But despite these glimmers of hope, doubts lingered. Could we ever truly rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Would the scars fade, or would they remain invisible but ever present? There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if this fragile peace would hold or if another bombshell awaited us around the corner. The knowledge of my half-sister loomed like a shadow I couldn't shake. Did I owe her anything? Should I reach out, try to understand her perspective? Or was it better to leave some wounds unexplored? By the time I returned home, I had no clear answers, only a renewed sense of purpose. Life wouldn't magically fix itself. I knew that, but I also realized I had the power to shape it differently. I started setting firmer boundaries, saying no without guilt, and prioritizing my mental health. Emma and I planned a summer trip with the kids, a small step toward creating new memories. My father and I continued therapy sessions, both individually and together. Progress was slow, uneven, but it was progress nonetheless.